Among 11 children, only I took care of our sick mother. When I read the will, I almost fainted. David held the sealed envelope with trembling hands as he watched Mrs. Margaret sleeping in the hospital bed he had set up in the living room of their small home in Queens, New York City. For 3 years, he had been the only one among 11 siblings who gave up everything to care for their mother when she could no longer take care of herself. The family's attorney, Attorney Jessica, arrived promptly at 2 in the afternoon with the final documents of the will. She explained that she would need to summon all the siblings for the official reading, but David protested, reminding her that none of them had even bothered to visit their mother during this difficult time. "Mr. David, I understand your frustration, but the law requires that everyone be notified," the attorney explained, arranging the papers on the kitchen table. "The law?" David sighed deeply. "The law didn't force any of them to take care of our mother when she needed them most." Margaret stirred in bed and murmured something unintelligible. David immediately stood up and went to her, adjusting her pillow and checking if she was cold. This was his daily routine, every hour, every minute. He had become her nurse, cook, companion, and son all at once. The first sibling to arrive was Karen, driving her imported car and complaining loudly about having to park in this modest neighborhood where their mother had always lived. She stepped into the house as if walking on contaminated ground, looking disdainfully at the old furniture and simple decor. "Goodness, David, how do you even live here?" she said, wiping her hand on her dress after touching the door. "Mom could have moved to a better place ages ago." "She likes it here, Karen. This is where she built her life with Dad," David replied, trying to stay calm. The second sibling, Richard, sent a message saying he was on a business trip in Washington, D.C. and couldn't attend. Cynthia called, claiming her son was sick. Anthony said work wouldn't allow him to come. One by one, the absent siblings began making elaborate excuses until only 5 of the 11 showed up for the reading. While waiting for the stragglers, Mrs. Margaret woke up confused and agitated. She looked at the faces around her bed and recognized no one except David. She gripped his hand tightly and asked who these strangers were in her home. An awkward silence filled the room. "Mom, these are your children, remember?" David said with endless patience, stroking her white hair. "My children?" Margaret looked at the faces again. "I only know you, my son. These others, I don't know who they are." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Karen was visibly bothered by their mother's reaction. Nicole, the third sister, tried to approach, but Margaret recoiled and clung even tighter to David. The attorney watched silently, making mental notes about the elderly woman's condition. "Perhaps we should begin the reading," Attorney Jessica suggested, sensing the tension in the air. She revealed that Mrs. Margaret had modified the will several times over the years, always with the assistance of a different lawyer to ensure everything was legally sound. The siblings present immediately began arguing about who deserved what, completely ignoring David, who still held their mother's hand. "I always helped with the household bills," Karen lied shamelessly. "That's a lie. You disappeared when Dad got sick and only showed up at the funeral," Nicole shot back. "At least I don't live on the other side of the country pretending I don't have a family," Karen retorted, referring to Michael, who had come from Seattle. David remained silent, stroking his mother's hair as she had fallen back asleep. He remembered every sleepless night, every trip to the hospital, every medication bought with what little remained from his salary as a math teacher. He had taken leave from school to care for her full-time. During the heated argument, the attorney casually mentioned that Mrs. Margaret had a bank account none of the children knew about. The eyes of the siblings present gleamed at the possibility of hidden wealth. Voices rose even higher as they speculated about secret funds and investments. "Mom was always frugal," said Michael, already calculating his imaginary share. "She must have saved a lot," added Nicole, rubbing her hands together. David shook his head and calmly revealed he had spent all his savings over the past 3 years. He sold his car, cancelled his private health insurance, stopped going out, all to afford the expensive medications and treatments the public system didn't provide. You have no idea how much it costs to care for someone with Mum's condition, he said, his voice breaking. Diapers, medications, private appointments, when there were no openings at the clinic. Karen cut him off with a venomous accusation. Oh, David, stop playing the victim. Everyone knows you only stayed here because you wanted the house. You manipulated Mom into changing the will. The silence that followed was sharp. David felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. 3 years of dedication, of unconditional love reduced to a claim of greed. He swallowed the lump in his throat and kept stroking his mother's hair. If that's what you think, then you don't know me or Mom at all, he replied with dignity. The attorney, uncomfortable with the argument, called for silence and began the official reading of the will. The document was long and detailed, with specific instructions for each child. For Karen, Mrs. Margaret left the family jewelry set she had coveted since she was young. For Richard, who was absent, the collection of antique books belonging to her late husband. The siblings began to smile, pleased with the bequests being announced. Nicole would receive the porcelain dinner set. Michael would get the paintings from the living room. Each seemed to receive something they'd wanted for years. When it was David's turn, the attorney paused dramatically. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others already mocking, waiting to see his reward for 3 years of care. To my son David, the attorney read, I leave only an old shoebox stored in my bedroom closet. The burst of cruel laughter was immediate. Karen clapped sarcastically, Michael shook his head in false pity, and Nicole muttered something about serves him right. David felt his world collapse. 3 years of his life, enormous sacrifices, and all he got was an old shoebox. I told you he wouldn't get anything valuable, Karen said between laughs. Mom must have seen right through him. Poor guy thought he'd get rich taking care of the old lady, Michael added without a shred of compassion. David stood slowly, humiliated and shattered. He walked to his mother's room like a condemned man heading to the gallows. The others kept laughing, calling it poetic justice. In the closet, he found the box tied with a faded ribbon. He returned to the living room carrying it under his siblings' mocking gazes. His hands trembled as he untied the ribbon. The first thing he saw were hundreds of small folded notes, carefully organized. He picked one at random and unfolded it. March 17th. Today, my David bathed me with such tenderness. He sang the song I used to sing to him when he was little. He picked another note. May 23. David stayed up all night because I was in pain. He held my hand and told me he loved me. The papers trembled in his hands as he realized there were hundreds of them. Each one documented a special moment from the 3 years of care. His mother, even with her illness, had secretly recorded every loving gesture, every sacrifice. July the 2nd, David sold his car to buy my medicine. He said it was more important for me to get better. September 15th, today I cried because I felt useless. David hugged me and said I was the most important person in his life. Tears streamed down David's face as he read. His siblings stopped laughing, puzzled by his reaction. At the bottom of the box was a larger envelope with his name written in his mother's shaky handwriting. Inside the envelope were deeds to 3 properties in upscale neighborhoods of New York City, an apartment in the Upper East Side, a house in Brooklyn Heights, and a commercial space in Midtown Manhattan. David couldn't believe his eyes. His mother had discreetly purchased them over the years with small savings no one knew existed. But it wasn't the documents that moved him. Alongside them was a letter written with love. My beloved son David, while your siblings fought over material things, you gave me your time, your affection, your life. Time is priceless, and the love you dedicated to me is worth more than any fortune. These properties are just a small token of my gratitude for having a son like you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the attorney then revealed there was a second part of the will, kept secret. Mrs. Margaret had stipulated that the 3 properties could only be sold if all 11 children unanimously agreed to use the money to create a care center for abandoned seniors in their own neighborhood. Otherwise, they would remain permanently in David's name. The silence that followed was deafening. The siblings present were stunned, trying to process the information. The woman they had dismissed as just a sick old lady had devised a brilliant plan to teach them a lesson about love and family responsibility. "This can't be legal," Karen shouted, snatching the documents from the attorney's hands. "Everything is perfectly legal," Attorney Jessica replied calmly. "Your mother was completely lucid when she made these changes. I have medical reports and even video recordings to prove it." The argument escalated when they discovered that the so-called mysterious bank account contained only enough to pay for a dignified funeral. The real wealth was in the properties no one had suspected existed. Karen tried to argue that their mother hadn't been in her right mind when she altered the will. "Our mother was smarter than all of us combined," David said, still holding the notes. "She knew exactly what she was doing." The attorney then presented detailed medical reports and began playing the videos Mrs. Margaret had secretly recorded during moments of clarity. On the tablet screen appeared the image of the woman seated on the same bed where she now slept, but fully lucid and determined. "I know my children think I don't understand anything anymore, but my mind still works fine. David is the only one who didn't abandon me. He lost 3 years of his life taking care of me, while the others don't even care if I'm alive." In the videos, she recounted in detail how each child had abandoned her with different excuses. She mentioned the unfulfilled promises of visits, the grandchildren they never brought to meet their grandmother, the forgotten birthdays, the ignored special dates. Karen promised to visit every Sunday for 2 years, but there's always an excuse. Richard said he'd take me to live with him in Washington, D.C., but then he changed his mind. Nicole only calls when she needs to borrow money. The siblings present lowered their heads, ashamed by their own mother's words. Each accusation was true, each disappointment documented with painful precision. David watched the videos with a mix of sadness and pride, seeing his mother defend her sacrifices. "David put his life on hold for me. He stopped dating, missed job opportunities, sold everything he had. He deserves to be rewarded. Not for material possessions, but for the love he showed." In the last video, Mrs. Margaret explained her plan in detail. The properties were to secure David's future, but also an opportunity for the other children to redeem themselves by creating something greater than a simple inheritance. David stood up and walked over to his mother, who had woken again. She recognized him immediately and smiled, squeezing his hand with the little strength she had left. He whispered in her ear that he loved her, regardless of inheritances or wills. "I've always loved you more, my son," she murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. The siblings watched the scene, finally understanding what they had lost. Michael tried to approach the bed, but Mrs. Margaret flinched and clung to David's arm, not recognizing the son who lived far away. "I'm sorry, Mom, Michael began, but the words caught in his throat. Nicole started crying, realizing she had wasted years of time with her mother. Karen remained silent for the first time since arriving, reflecting on her own choices. The final twist came when David made a decision that surprised everyone. After rereading his mother's letter and seeing his siblings' pain, he announced his choice. He would turn one of the properties into a care center for abandoned seniors, exactly as Mrs. Margaret had suggested. "You can keep the jewelry, the paintings, the china," he said, his voice firm. "But I invite all of you to join the center's project. Not with money, but with your presence, your time, your love." Some faces lit up at the possibility of redemption. Nicole was the first to accept, saying she wanted to learn how to care for the elderly the way David cared for their mother. Michael asked to transfer his job back to New York City so he could help. Karen, who had been the cruelest, took longer to respond. Finally, she apologized to David, admitting she had always felt guilty for not helping and lashed out precisely because she knew she was wrong. "I envy you, David," she confessed, crying. "You had the courage to do what all of us should have done." In the months that followed, the family dynamic changed completely. 3 of the siblings began visiting regularly, discovering firsthand what David had done every day. They helped set up the care center, learning the value of donated time and love expressed through actions. Mrs. Margaret, still lucid at times, smiled seeing her children reunited. She had achieved the impossible, bringing the family together through care and compassion. The center was planned for the Brooklyn Heights home after necessary renovations. Richard and the other absent siblings were informed about the project. Some showed genuine interest in participating, others kept their distance. David coordinated everything with the same dedication he had shown his mother, proving his character was never self-serving. The most remarkable transformation was Karen's. She began visiting her mother twice a week, bringing flowers and learning to administer medicine, change diapers, and keep her company. Awkward at first, she gradually gained confidence and genuine affection. "I never imagined caring for someone could be so rewarding," she told David during one visit. "It's hard at first, but then you realize you receive much more than you give," he replied, watching his mother smile at Karen. The apartment in the Upper East Side was sold to fund the renovations of the center. David kept the commercial space as an investment for the future and continued living in the house in Queens with his mother. The routine remained the same, but now he was no longer alone. Nicole brought her teenage children to meet their grandmother, who until then had only been distant names to her. Seeing Mrs. Margaret's joy as she met her grandchildren, everyone understood how much she had suffered from the family's isolation. "Grandma, you look just like the old photos," said her 15-year-old granddaughter, holding her hand. You're Nicole's daughter?" Mrs. Margaret asked in a moment of clarity. "Yes, Grandma. I'm your granddaughter, Emily." Emotion overwhelmed everyone present. Years of separation were being healed through simple moments like that. David recorded everything on his phone, wanting to preserve every second of that reunion. The care center began taking shape. Professionals were hired, but the family decided to stay directly involved. Karen took over administrative duties. Michael would handle maintenance when he moved back, and Nicole coordinated recreational activities. "Mom was right," Michael said during a planning meeting. "She taught us that inheritance isn't just material possessions, it's the good we leave behind in the world." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. Mrs. Margaret attended the meetings from her bed, occasionally offering suggestions when her mind was clear. She proposed that the center have a garden like the one she kept in her backyard, where the elderly could plant and tend to flowers. "The plants, they keep us hopeful," she said, gazing out the window at the rose bushes David faithfully watered every day. The center's opening was scheduled for Mrs. Margaret's 80th birthday. All 11 children were invited, even those who had remained distant. David insisted it be a celebration, not an obligation. Richard came from Washington, D.C., especially for the event, bringing his wife and children his mother had never met. Cynthia arrived with her husband, nervous about how she'd be received. Anthony brought his whole family, including his mother-in-law, who also needed special care. "She won't recognize me," Richard said hesitantly at the bedroom door. "Maybe not," David replied, "but you'll recognize yourself as her son, and that's what matters." The celebration was emotional. Mrs. Margaret, dressed in the blue dress she wore for special occasions, was more lucid than she had been in months. She recognized almost all her children and was moved to meet grandchildren and in-laws for the first time. "My family is complete," she whispered to David, watching the room full of relatives talking and laughing together. The center was officially named Margaret's House, Center for Loving Care. A plaque at the entrance bore one of her sayings, "The time we dedicate to those we love is never time wasted." David gave a heartfelt speech about how he had learned that the greatest treasure he received wasn't the properties, but the 3 years by his mother's side. He spoke of every difficult dawn that became a life lesson, every moment of exhaustion rewarded with her smile. "My mother taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's action. It's being there in the hard moments. It's giving up part of yourself for those we love. She gave me far more than I ever gave her. The properties were just a consequence of true love, not the goal." The true legacy of Mrs. Margaret was the transformation she had brought to the family, from a group of strangers connected only by blood to a family united by love and mutual responsibility. During the celebration, each sibling had the chance to speak privately with their mother. Some asked for forgiveness for years of absence. Others thanked her for lessons they only now understood. She listened patiently, blessing each in her own way. "You've always been my children," she told each of them. "You just needed to learn how to be a real family." Karen, who had been the most resistant, cried as she hugged her mother. "Forgive me, Mum, for being so selfish. David taught me what it truly means to love." "It's never too late, my dear," Mrs. Margaret replied. "Love doesn't have an expiration date." The center opened its doors a week after the inauguration. The first senior to be welcomed was Mr. Walter, Mrs. Margaret's neighbor who had been living alone. David made sure he was the first, as a tribute to the community that had embraced their family for decades. "Mr. David, you're doing something beautiful here," Mr. Walter said, moved as he toured the facility. "Mrs. Margaret must be so proud." "It was her idea," David answered. "I'm just making it happen." In the first few months, the center took in 12 seniors who had been abandoned by their families, each with their own story, their own pain, but also their own joys. David realized that caring for his mother had only been the first step in a much larger journey. A routine settled in naturally. David continued caring for his mother in the mornings, worked at the center in the afternoons, and returned home at night. Karen took over the afternoons with Mrs. Margaret. Nicole handled recreational activities at the center, and Michael finally completed his move from Seattle. "Dad would be proud," Nicole said one day, watching her mother in the center's garden surrounded by other seniors planting rose bushes. "He always said family is who shows up when you need them," David recalled. It took a while, but we finally got the message. The change in David's life was gradual but profound. He discovered a calling for caregiving that went beyond filial duty. He began studying gerontology at night, wanting to provide the best possible care for the seniors at the center. Mrs. Margaret watched this growth with visible pride. In her lucid moments, she talked with David about the center's future, suggested activities, and shared stories from her own youth that might interest the other residents. "You were born for this, my son," she told him. "I always knew you had a special heart." Karen also found herself in volunteer work. She left her job at a multinational company to dedicate herself fully to the center. The woman who once cared only about appearances and status found purpose in caring for people society had forgotten. "Never thought I'd trade high heels for nursing shoes," she joked, but her satisfaction with her new life was clear. Richard managed to transfer to New York City and took over the center's finances. Michael handled maintenance and small repairs. Nicole coordinated cultural activities, bringing in local artists for performances and workshops. The siblings' bond wasn't perfect. It had its adjustments and occasional arguments, but it was real. They had learned that family isn't about being flawless, but about never giving up on each other in tough times. Margaret's house became a landmark in Queens. Families from other neighborhoods sought it out for their elderly loved ones, drawn by its homely atmosphere and personalized care. David made sure every new resident was welcomed as part of the family. "No one here is just a number," he explained to families. "Everyone has their own story, their own preferences, their own needs. We respect that." Mrs. Margaret, even with the limitations imposed by her illness, became the unofficial matriarch of the center. The other seniors enjoyed talking to her, listening to her stories, and receiving her advice. She had found a new purpose in life. "Mrs. Margaret, you're an inspiration to all of us," said Mrs. Mary, one of the residents. "Your family is truly blessed." "Family isn't a ready-made blessing," she replied in a moment of clarity. "It's something we build every day, brick by brick." David wrote down all his mother's words in a special notebook. He wanted to preserve her wisdom to pass on to the children he might have in the future. The girlfriend he had lost during the years of caregiving had returned to his life, impressed by the man he had become. "You've grown more mature, more sensitive," Jennifer said during one of their meetings. "Taking care of your mother made you grow as a person." "She taught me more than any university ever could," David admitted. "I learned about patience, unconditional love, and what truly matters in life." His relationship with Jennifer rebuilt itself on firmer ground. She began visiting Mrs. Margaret regularly and volunteered to help at the center on weekends. The family was growing again, but organically and naturally. 2 years after the center opened, Mrs. Margaret had a worrying relapse. She spent a week in the hospital, surrounded by her 11 children who took turns staying with her. It was the first time in decades they had all come together for her sake, not out of obligation. "Mum, you need to get better so you can see the center grow," Richard said, holding her hand in the ICU. "The center has already grown," she replied, looking at all her children gathered around her bed. "You are my center. You are my greatest work." She recovered from that crisis, but everyone understood time was becoming more precious. The siblings set up a rotation so someone would always be with her, not out of duty but love. David remained the primary caregiver, but now he shared the responsibilities and joys. Karen learned how to bathe her, Nicole mastered medication management, and Michael installed cameras to monitor her remotely while working. "Now I understand what you felt," Karen told David after spending a night caring for their sick mother. "It's exhausting, but it's also sacred." "Exactly," David agreed. "Sacred." The Queens neighborhood community fully embraced the center. Children from the nearby school visited the seniors for intergenerational activities. The corner bakery donated bread every morning. The local grocery store offered discounts for the center's purchases. "You haven't just changed your own lives, you've transformed the whole neighborhood," said Mrs. May, owner of a traditional Japanese restaurant. "Love is contagious." David realized his mother had planned much more than just a lesson for her children. She had created a movement for social change, proving that seniors aren't a burden but a source of wisdom and experience. The center expanded into the house next door, donated by a childless neighbor inspired by the family's story. They now cared for 25 seniors with a waiting list. David hired qualified professionals, but kept the family-like atmosphere. "Professionalism shouldn't erase humanity," he told the staff. "Technique is important, but love is essential." 3 years after opening, the center received recognition from the city as a model for compassionate care. David was invited to speak about family caregiving and social responsibility. Karen wrote a book about the family's experience. "Our mother's famous now," Michael joked at the book launch. "She was always famous in this neighborhood," David replied. "Now others can learn from her." Mrs. Margaret, present at the launch in her wheelchair, smiled as she watched her children working together. Her eyes shone with pride, seeing that her plan had worked, turning an inheritance of division into a legacy of unity. Karen's book, The Shoebox, The Will That Changed Our Family, became a hit among families facing similar situations. The sales went back to the center, creating a sustainable cycle of help. "Mom, you've become a writer by proxy," Nicole teased, showing her the book. "I always knew I had stories to tell," Mrs. Margaret replied. "I just needed someone to write them." David married Jennifer in a simple ceremony in the center's garden, with Mrs. Margaret as the special matron of honor. All the resident seniors joined the celebration, which was planned to be accessible and inclusive. The joy was contagious. "Son, now I can rest in peace," Mrs. Margaret told David after the ceremony. "You've built a beautiful family." "The foundation was what you gave us, Mom," he answered. "I just carried it forward." Jennifer fit perfectly into the family and the center. As a physical therapist, she contributed both technical knowledge and deep care. The seniors adopted her as a granddaughter, and she returned their affection with special attention for each one. The center became a model replicated in other neighborhoods of New York City. David was consulted for the creation of similar centers, always emphasizing that the key difference lay in family and community involvement. "It's no use just creating beautiful spaces," he explained in his talks. "You have to build real connections." 5 years after that transformative afternoon of reading the will, Mrs. Margaret celebrated her 85th birthday, surrounded by 53 people, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all the seniors from the center who had become family too. "Mom, you did it," David said during the birthday speech. "You turned 11 quarrelsome children into a united family. You turned a simple house into a center of love. You turned pain into joy." Mrs. Margaret, lucid on that special day, looked at everyone present and whispered, "Love always finds a way." The party lasted late into the night, with music, dancing, and countless stories shared. The center's seniors mingled with family members, no distinction between them. Everyone was part of the big family Mrs. Margaret had dreamed of creating. David watched from a corner, holding the notebook where he'd recorded his mother's sayings. The last entry read, "The greatest treasure we can leave the world is the people we love, transformed by our love." End of story. And you, what did you think of this touching story? Could you imagine how David must have felt when he discovered his mother's true will? Tell us in the comments which part moved your heart the most, and if you know a similar story in your own family. Don't forget to leave a like so more people can be moved by this story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other stories that will stir your emotions.